At my husband's firm anniversary gala, his senior partner raised his glass and said, "To the brilliant men who built this company and to the lovely wives who stayed home so they could." Everyone laughed. My husband laughed the loudest. I smiled, set down my champagne and said quietly, "Interesting toast, Daniel. Especially since the design methodology that built this firm is mine." The room went so silent I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning, when I was still pretending everything was fine. The alarm went off at 5:45, and I was already awake. I'd been lying in the dark for an hour, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom my husband picked without asking me, in the neighborhood he chose without consulting me, in the life I'd agreed to piece by piece until I couldn't remember agreeing to any of it. My husband was still asleep, one arm thrown over his face, his breathing slow and even. He had the particular peace of a man who had never once questioned whether his life was truly his. I watched him for a moment the way you study something you've memorized so completely it no longer holds any surprise. And then I got up to make his coffee. 2 sugars. Oat milk, not regular, because he'd read something about inflammation. Set on the right side of the sink because he was left-handed and liked to reach across. I had learned these things the way you learn the geography of a country you never planned to move to gradually, without celebration, until one day you realize you know every road but none of them lead anywhere you wanted to go. We had been married for 11 years. I was 38. Before him, I had been someone worth being. I had graduated top of my class from Carnegie Mellon School of Architecture. I had won the Davenport Prize for Emerging Designers at 24, the youngest recipient in the award's history. I had been offered a fellowship in Copenhagen that my professor called a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I had said no to all of it because my husband, then just the man I loved, was starting his own firm, and he needed someone who understood design at a structural level, someone who could be his sounding board, his creative North Star, his foundation while he built toward the sky. He needed me, and I needed to be needed. That was the honest part I didn't examine until much later. I poured his coffee and listened to the house breathe around me. Upstairs, our son was still asleep in the room I'd painted myself, a deep navy blue he'd chosen from a paint chip he carried in his pocket for 2 weeks before deciding. He was 8. He had my eyes and his father's confidence and, I hoped, the best parts of us both living somewhere inside him he hadn't discovered yet. My husband appeared in the kitchen at 7, already on his phone, already somewhere else entirely. "Big night," he said, not to me exactly, but not to anyone on the phone either. Just an announcement to the room. "I know," I said. "The Hargrove Gala. I have my dress picked out." He looked up from his phone with the mild surprise of a man who occasionally remembered his wife existed in 3 dimensions. "Right, yes. Just don't get into the design talk tonight, okay? These are professional contacts. It gets confusing when you start explaining things." I handed him his coffee. "Confusing for who?" "For them," he said, already moving toward the door. "They don't know your background. They just see you know." "What do they see?" He paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "They see my wife. Which is great. Which is perfect for tonight. Just smile, circulate, let me handle the business conversation." He kissed me on the cheek, tasted his coffee, nodded approval, and left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed. Let me tell you what my husband didn't know. What no one at Hargrove and Associates knew, despite working alongside the evidence of it every single day. 4 years into our marriage, when his firm was 18 months from collapse, when 3 major contracts had fallen through and his lead architect had quit to join a competitor and the bank was making sounds that kept my husband awake and rigid beside me at 2 a.m., I started working. Not visibly. Not with my name on anything. I had a studio space I told him was for personal projects. A room above our garage that he had walked past 1,000 times and never once opened the door to ask about. Inside that room I had 2 drafting tables, a high-end rendering setup, and 11 years of architecture education that had been quietly composting in the dark. I created a pseudonym, A.V. Crane. A designer with no face, no biography on any website, no social media presence, no address. Just work. Extraordinary work, submitted through my attorney to selective competitions and private clients who valued discretion. A.V. Crane won the Meridian Design competition in the firm's 4th year. The prize came with a licensing arrangement that Hargrove and Associates acquired, believing they were negotiating with a reclusive independent. The methodology embedded in that competition entry, a structural approach to integrating natural light corridors into commercial builds that reduced energy costs by up to 30%, became the cornerstone of every major Hargrove project for the next 7 years. My husband called it his firm's signature innovation. He presented it at conferences. He was photographed in architectural magazines standing in front of buildings whose bones I had designed. He thanked his team, his mentors, his own relentless curiosity about light and space. He never thanked me. He didn't know to. That was my choice in the beginning. I told myself I was protecting something: his confidence, our marriage, some fragile ecosystem that required me to remain invisible to survive. I told myself I would tell him eventually. When the time was right, when we were more stable, when I was sure he could hold the truth without it crushing something between us. The time was never right. And I kept working. A.V. Crane completed 12 projects over 7 years. 4 of them anchored Hargrove's portfolio. The intellectual property licensing fees ran through a holding company my attorney helped me establish. My father had left me a small inheritance when he died, enough to start something, and I had grown it quietly into something substantial. My husband thought the inheritance had gone to paying down our mortgage. It had, partially. The rest had become a foundation. I was 38 years old and I owned more of my husband's success than he could imagine. He didn't know. His partners didn't know. The architectural community that had made A.V. Crane something of a legend, a mysterious figure people occasionally speculated about at industry events, didn't know. Until the night of the Hargrove Gala, where his senior partner decided to make me a punchline. Daniel Whitmore had never liked me. He was the kind of man who organized the world into useful and decorative, and had assigned me to the second category the night my husband introduced us. He was 52, silver-haired, possessed of the permanent tan of someone with a second home in Sedona, and completely certain that his certainty about things was the same as being right about them. He found me near the Champagne station at 8:15, 20 minutes into an event I had spent 3 hours preparing for in ways no one would notice or thank me for. I had coordinated the catering because my husband had forgotten. I had confirmed the AV setup because his assistant was new. I had quietly ensured that the architectural models displayed along the east wall were positioned at the sight lines I knew from experience looked best under the room's particular lighting. No one knew I had done any of this. It ran smoothly, and smoothness is invisible. Margaret, Daniel said, using my name the way people use furniture functionally, without affection. You look well. Enjoying the party? It's a beautiful event, I said. He signaled a waiter, took 2 glasses, offered me one with the performance of someone demonstrating their own courtesy. You know, I was just telling someone that Ryan is the backbone of this place. 11 years, watching him build this from nothing. Remarkable man. He is, I agreed, because he was, in his way, and because I had made him that way, in my way. You must be proud, Daniel said. And there it was, the tone that meant the sentence was not actually a compliment to me. Supporting him through all of it. The lean years especially. That's a real contribution, you know. The kind people don't talk about enough. A few nearby conversations had slowed. His voice had the carrying quality of someone who had never needed to lower it. Though I imagine it can be, what's the word, limiting. A woman with your education, staying home, managing the domestic side. Do you ever wish you'd done more with the architecture degree? He tilted his head, genuinely curious in the way of someone who finds insects interesting without caring whether they live. I keep busy, I said. Oh, I'm sure. Ryan mentioned you do some sketching. Little personal projects. That's good, important to have a hobby when you're not, you know, working. He smiled at someone over my shoulder. Already half departed from the conversation he was still occupying. It's just, and I mean this kindly, sometimes I wonder if Ryan carries a little too much on his shoulders. If he had a partner who was more of a professional equal, someone in the field, someone who could really understand the pressure he caught himself, smiled again. But then, not every marriage can be a meeting of equals, can it? Some people are builders. Some people are supporters. Both necessary. He raised his glass toward the room. To the brilliant men who built this company, he said, loud enough now to pull the nearby cluster of colleagues into the moment. And to the lovely wives who stayed home so they could. The laughter was genuine. My husband, 10 feet away, talking to a client I had personally introduced him to 18 months earlier, laughed with his whole body. I set down my glass. Interesting toast, Daniel, I said. My voice was calm in the way of water that has been very still for a very long time, especially since the design methodology that built this firm is mine. The silence moved through the room in a wave. Daniel's smile stayed on his face the way a flag stays up after the wind stops, held by structure, not by anything living. I'm sorry? A.V. Crane, I said. The Meridian methodology, the light corridor system in the Hendricks building. The load distribution framework you used on the Pacific West Tower, the natural integration principles behind the Solaris complex. I picked up my glass again, unhurried. All mine. I've been licensing them to this firm for 7 years through a holding company called Clearwater IP. Your legal team has been sending payments to a post office box in Pittsburgh. Someone dropped something in the kitchen. The sound was very clear. My husband had turned around. His face was an expression I had never seen on him before, not anger, not confusion, something prior to both of those. Something that looked like the moment before a person understands that the ground has changed under their feet. That's not. Daniel started. I have the original filing dates, I said. The competition submissions with timestamped entries. 11 years of correspondence between A.V. Crane and Hargrove's legal department, none of which my husband was ever copied on, because your firm handles IP licensing through a separate administrative channel. I looked at him directly. Your own protocols protected my anonymity better than I could have managed alone. My husband said my name. Just my name, quietly, from across the room. I didn't look at him yet. I wasn't ready. This is insane, Daniel said. His certainty had not left him, but it had rearranged itself into something defensive, a wall instead of a landscape. You're making a scene at a professional event. You made a toast, I said. I responded. That's a conversation, not a scene. A woman near the bar, I recognized her as one of the junior associates, someone I had spoken to at 3 previous events, someone whose name I remembered and whose career I had quietly watched, had her phone out. I noticed it the way you notice weather changing. I excused myself and walked to the coat check. My husband caught up with me in the lobby, his hand on my arm, his voice low and fractured in a way I had only heard once before. When his father died. Margaret. What just happened? A conversation, I said. You said the methodology. He stopped. Started again. A.V. Crane is you. Yes. For how long? 7 years of licensing. 11 years of work. He let go of my arm. I watched him process it the way you watch a building settle, small movements, barely perceptible, that means something foundational has shifted. Why didn't you tell me? This was the question I had been carrying the answer to for a long time. Because the first year, I was afraid you'd feel threatened. The second year, I was afraid I'd been gone too long to come back to myself without it breaking something. By the third year, I had stopped being afraid of those things and started being afraid of something else, that if you knew, you would make it about you. That you'd say we did this together in the way you always say we when you mean I. And I would lose the one thing in my life that was entirely mine. He stared at me. You laughed, I said. 5 minutes ago. When Daniel called the wives decorative. You laughed. That was it, was just, you laughed, I said again. Not angry. Just naming it, the way you name a thing to make it real. I took my coat and went home to relieve the babysitter. My attorney, Christine, arrived at 9 the next morning with coffee and the particular energy of a woman who has been waiting for something to become actionable. The video has 40,000 views, she said, setting her laptop on my kitchen table. The junior associate had posted it. Not the full conversation, just Daniel's toast and my response. 17 seconds. The caption read, "She stayed home so he could build his career." Except she built it. The IP licensing agreement comes up for renewal in 6 weeks, Christine said. Clearwater IP can decline to renew. Without the Meridian methodology and its derivatives, Hargrove loses the technical foundation of their last 4 major contracts. They'd have to renegotiate from scratch or license from a competitor. I don't want to destroy the firm, I said. There are 43 employees who had nothing to do with Daniel's toast. Christine nodded. She knew me well enough not to argue. Then what do you want? I had thought about this during the long quiet hours after I put my son to bed, sitting in my studio above the garage with the lights off, listening to the neighborhood settle. Credit, I said. Real credit. A.V. Crane is me, and I want that on record, publicly. In the firm's portfolio, in the competition histories, in the architectural press. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. And I want Daniel gone. Not destroyed. Just gone from anything that has my name attached to it. And Ryan? I was quiet for a moment. That's a different conversation, I said. My husband came to find me in the studio that night. He stood in the doorway looking at my drafting tables, my rendering setup, the wall covered in working sketches and material samples and 11 years of the work I had hidden from him. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. I didn't know this existed, he said finally. I know. This is where you go when you say you're working on personal projects. Yes. He crossed the room slowly, the way you move in a space that has reoriented everything you thought you understood. He stopped in front of a large rendering pinned to the board, an early version of what became the Solaris complex, my handwriting in the margins, dated 4 years ago. This was on the cover of Architectural Review, he said. They called it a paradigm shift. Yes. And he stopped. You were here. Making dinner and being at school pickups and planning our vacations, and you were also. Yes. He turned to look at me. I'm trying to understand how I missed this. You didn't look, I said. Not cruel. Just accurate. You never opened this door. I didn't lock it. He sat down on the stool by my second drafting table, the one I used for initial sketches, the one that had a dent in the leg from the time I'd moved it in a hurry and hit the door frame. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his head down, and I watched him doing the difficult work of seeing himself clearly for the first time in years. Daniel's going to fight the IP claim, he said. Let him, I said. The original filing dates are unambiguous. He'll say you used firm resources. I have 11 years of utility bills for this studio, my own equipment, my own software licenses. Christine has everything. He was quiet for a while. You could have told me, he said. I know you said why you didn't, but we're married, Margaret. Whatever I did, whatever I was, you could have told me. Could I have? I asked. Not to wound him. Genuinely asking. Tell me honestly. If I had come to you in year 2 and said I've been designing under a pseudonym and you've been unknowingly building your firm on my work, what would you have done? He opened his mouth and closed it. That's what I thought, I said. The press coverage came in 3 waves. The first was the video, which moved from architectural niche accounts to general interest feeds within 24 hours. The second was Christine's announcement, distributed to 6 industry publications simultaneously, formally identifying A.V. Crane as Margaret Chen Hargrove and documenting the body of work. The third was the response from women, mostly, though not only women, people who sent emails to the Clearwater IP address I'd made public, people who wrote long, careful letters about recognition and invisibility and the mathematics of sacrifice. A professor from Carnegie Mellon wrote to say she had been using A.V. Crane's Meridian methodology in her graduate seminars for 3 years. She wanted permission to update her curriculum to include my full biography. A woman in Phoenix wrote to say she had her own studio above her garage. Her husband had never opened the door either. Daniel issued a statement calling the situation a misunderstanding. His employment at Hargrove and Associates ended quietly 2 weeks later. My husband signed the termination paperwork. My son, who was 8 and therefore understood things in the way that 8-year-olds do completely, without the filters adults use to make reality more comfortable, came home from school one Friday with a drawing he'd made during free period. It was a building, all angles and light, with a figure standing in front of it. Underneath, in his handwriting, my mom made this one. I put it on the drafting table where I could see it while I worked. The Hargrove situation resolved in a way that satisfied no one completely and disappointed no one catastrophically, which Christine told me was the definition of a good legal outcome. The IP licensing agreement was renegotiated with Clearwater in my name, disclosed. The firm's portfolio was updated. The Meridian methodology was recredited in 4 competition archives. My husband and I moved through the house like 2 people learning a new language in the same space, making mistakes, correcting them, occasionally saying the right thing accidentally. He started cooking on Sundays. Not well, but consistently. He asked about my projects and listened to the answers without redirecting the conversation toward himself. He still forgot things. He was still sometimes the man who had laughed at Daniel's toast, and I was not sure that man was entirely gone or whether entirely gone was something I needed him to be. Some mornings I made his coffee. Some mornings he made mine. The Carnegie Mellon professor invited me to give a guest lecture in the fall. I accepted. standing at the front of a room full of students who knew my name and my work and nothing about my marriage or my son or the 11 years I had spent above a garage making myself real in the dark. It was the strangest and most uncomplicated I had felt in longer than I could precisely calculate. Afterward, a student approached me, young, first year, the specific uncertain confidence of someone who knows they're capable but hasn't been told yet. Is it true you just stopped? After you won the Davenport? And then came back? I didn't stop, I said. I just did it somewhere no one could see. She thought about this. Was that worth it? I looked at her for a long moment, at her young face and her whole unwritten future, and I thought about my son's drawing on the drafting table, and my father's inheritance grown into something he would have recognized, and my husband learning to cook on Sundays, and the 43 people still employed at Hargrove because I had chosen reconstruction over ruin. I thought about the night of the gala, and Daniel's toast and the way my voice had felt in the moment I stopped swallowing it. No, I said. But I'm done with worth it as a question. I'm just doing it now. She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're filing something away for later. I drove home through the early dark, past the houses with their lit windows and whatever was happening inside each of them that no one on the outside could see. I pulled into the driveway, and the studio light above the garage was on, which meant my son had gone up there to do his homework the way he'd started doing lately because he said he liked the smell of it. I sat in the car for a moment before going in. I had not arrived at some clean shore where everything made sense. The years were still behind me. The choices were still the choices I had made, even the ones I'd been maneuvered into. Because at some point a thing you allow becomes a thing you've chosen, and the line between them is where you have to make peace with yourself. But I knew something now that I had not known the morning before the gala, or the morning before that, or the 11 years of mornings when I had made his coffee and smoothed the invisible architecture of his days. I knew that the light was on in my studio, and my son was up there doing his homework, and in 6 weeks I would stand in front of a room and say my name and mean it completely. I went inside. If this story had you feeling something, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments, what was the moment that got you the most? Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're there when it drops.